This episode of The Unstarving Musician is sponsored by Liner Notes. Learn from the hundreds of musicians and industry pros I've spoken with for The Unstarving Musician on topics such as marketing, songwriting, touring, sync licensing, and much more. Sign up for Liner Notes. Liner Notes is an email newsletter from yours truly in which I share some of the best knowledge gems garnered from the many conversations featured on The Unstarving Musician. You'll also be privy to the latest podcast episodes and Liner Notes subscriber exclusives. Sign up at unstarvingmusician.com. It's free and you can unsubscribe at any time. This is The Unstarving Musician. I'm Rabanzo. This is my podcast. It features conversations with independent music artists and industry professionals with occasional special topic episodes featuring yours truly. A glimpse into the minds of my varied guests, all intended to help independent music artists better understand the marketing, business, and creative processes that empower us to do more of what we love. Make music. Welcome to another episode. It is early on a Friday morning, the day I'm pushing this episode out into the wild. I don't usually do this, but yesterday was, I guess, a little hectic. But I got coffee, which I also don't usually do when I make these for you. Blessed caffeine. Okay, I want to tell you about some new music real quick in case you're looking for something to listen to. Former guests of the podcast have things going on. So Jan Close has a new acoustic music video for a relatively new song of his called All the Way Down. Eli Lev has a newish tune out called Universal Song. Chris Taylor has an EP called Heroes to Zeros. It's an EP of home recordings. And then my friend Fiddle Joe Patterson, who has not been on the podcast but probably should be, he has a new video from, that video is called Playa Serena, and it's from Country Caribbean. That's the name of the album. A new video on that one. I'm going to put links to all of those in the show notes. And then other than that, hey, if you love this podcast, please visit unstarvingmusician.com/crowd sponsor to learn about the many ways of showing your love and support. We have a new tip jar there. It's still kind of new. So, click tip done. Your support equals love, and we appreciate it. All right, and then how are you doing? Did I ask you that? I hope you're great. I hope you're having caffeine or whatever you do in the morning when you listen to this. Maybe you're listening to it at night. Maybe you're doing that with a glass of wine or something, or maybe a soda, or maybe water. I don't know. What do you drink? All right, my guest is Nichole Wagner. She is an Austin-based singer-songwriter. She has an album coming out called Plastic Flowers. She has some great music out already, which you can find at NicholeWagnerMusic.com. She was actually born and raised in the small town of Louviers, Colorado. I'm pretty sure that's a French name. It's a dynamite town. We talk about that. She studied journalism at Arizona State University, landed a college correspondent gig with Spin Magazine, which some of you may remember, which sort of got her going in the direction of music, something she'd been dreaming about up until that time. She eventually moved to Austin to become a musician, so she's living her best life being a musician now. She released her first album in 2018. Her music is pretty great. It's kind of a blend of country rock, soulful, funky, Americana. It's terrific. That's a good word. Terrific, right? We talk about all of this, plus rebooting her Patreon, drive-by poetry, something she's into, perceived roadblocks to writing music and learning to play the guitar, house concerts, a big-ass birthday show she did in 2023, this year in July, a couple of favorite songwriters of hers, her love of stationery, and some mutual acquaintances. Again, find all her stuff at NicholeWagnerMusic.com. Here is me talking with Nichole Wagner. Are you in Austin today?
I am.
Very nice. Are you acquainted with Brian Wolf?
Yeah, I know Brian.
He's a nice guy.
He is. He's. We kind of run in slightly different circles, but he's a cool guy. Yeah. I like what he does and how he kind of builds community around him.
Yeah. Musically, he's maybe kind of sort of converging your direction these days, but I know he started off in a pretty heavy genre.
Yeah. His band's what, Finite Fidelity? No.
Let's see.
That's not his band.
Brian
what is his band's
Wolf
name?
and oh my goodness, I'm forgetting. It's terrible.
I was on his podcast a million years ago.
Yeah, so let me see if I can remember the name of the original band. What was it? My gosh, I'm blanking. I'll well, we'll find it later if it's
That's all
important for
right.
us. I know he's been on this show. I met him in person. I've been on his podcast a while back when they were doing it. Actually, well, I forgot he had two podcasts. Were you on the thing he was doing by himself as with songwriters, or with
Um,
like were there a couple, two or three guys talking to you?
there were a couple people there.
Yep, that was
Yeah.
the first bands, I think. So, how long have you been in
Okay.
Austin? I gathered that you grew up in Colorado.
Yeah. I've been in Austin since 2010. So like 13 years.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah, it's long enough to feel like it's home and to, you know, shake my head at people who talk about things today like as if they were, the same way 15 years ago. And I know where all the old Antones have been, so I feel like that's all you can really ask for a pseudo native at this point.
Yeah, I have been going to Austin not frequently, but for a lot of years. I used to live in Arlington, Texas, and
Oh, okay.
but and then so I went there when I was really young, and I'm pretty old now. And then I returned somewhere around like 2007, a couple of years in a row to do the South by like I don't know if it was technology or interactive or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and and gosh, how much time has already passed? And I think when I met Brian Wolf, it was just a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, and I hear, I mean, I see it, the changes, but um, I hear people complain that have been there a long time about a little bit. Lament is maybe a better word about the growth and
Yeah, that's anywhere you go, though.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, going back to Denver, I do the same thing when I go there, and people that I've known that grew up there too are all like, it's the same everywhere. Everywhere changes.
Yeah, indeed. How do you say the name of the town where you grew up?
Louviers.
Louviers. I knew it was something sort of French sounding.
Yeah.
So is that near Denver?
It's about 45 minutes south of Denver.
Okay.
So it's like adjacent to, but because of the way that the town sort of came to be, it's not what you would consider a suburb of Denver. Um, it's an old dynamite factory company town.
Wow.
And so the DuPont company had a lot of land around the dynamite factory um, because you don't want things too close to your dynamite factory.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
And eventually they had given that land or sold that land to kind of the open space parks division. So now it's a lot of open space around the town. It's not even really a town, it's a village by definition. Um, but the highway I-25 goes, I don't know, 15 miles or so to the east of the old highway that goes through that area, Santa Fe or 85. And as a result of that and having so much space and sort of kind of a weird development path, it's far enough out that you still kind of drive through open space to get there. Highlands Ranch is sort of encroaching in areas, but it's definitely not a suburb in the traditional sense.
Interesting. Did they pay homage to the Dynamite era?
Um, sort of. A lot of the people that lived there when I was growing up there kind of had connections in some way to the factory. It closed in the 70s, and then people were able to buy their houses from the company. So a lot of people still stayed. Um, and the Village Club, which was like the central meeting space, had been built by DuPont, and there were, some old timers that had stories. And then the factory was somewhat dismantled, but somewhat still there. But there wasn't really any direct like celebration of the factory. You know, DuPont wasn't a mining company in terms of like how workers were treated, but it was still a company town. And that comes with a lot of, I think, mixed feelings for people to have everything in your life controlled by where you work. The house you got to live in was based on your rank in the company. You know, they had a town slash company doctor. A lot of the literature is framed very much around having a town doctor and a town this, but in reality, it was a company doctor and a company store. So everything, you know, history is written by the winners and by the people who stick around.
The folks who own the town.
Yeah, so it's a little bit difficult to really dissect what life was like in, you know, 1950s Louviers or 1940s Louviers, or
Were
even
you
before then.
were you in Louviers when you started thinking about music and singing and you were writing?
I was, in the sense that I knew from a very early age that I wanted to do that, but because we were fairly isolated, I never really understood like how you got to do that. The only musicians I knew were like playing bluegrass jams in the sort of shared church in Louviers, or like playing Red Rocks. And there's a huge gap in between those two things,
Hmm.
that was not at all clear growing up there. I didn't realize you could play like a smaller gig, or that you just started doing it. I thought kind of that somebody had to like knock on your door and be like, by the way, we noticed you singing in the mirror in a hairbrush, and we think you should come join Fleetwood Mac. Like, that's not how it works. But I didn't know how it worked.
That's great. Is there a pinnacle moment in your life that makes you think that's when I really knew that I wanted to do it?
Um, as far as knowing that I wanted to do it, I don't think so. There's, you know, my dad has a box of cassette tapes that I made when I was just a tiny kid in one of those Fisher Price kind of microphone recorder situations,
Hmm.
where I'd make up my own songs and sing songs that I knew. And I was always drawn to that. But then I think the moment where I knew it was possible was much later. I had already moved to Austin. And after having met so many musicians that were working on a level that seemed attainable, you know, playing smaller clubs, playing venues that you could just walk into the night of the show and like pay, you know, cover at the door, talking to enough musicians to realize that the way you do it is just by doing it. I had a really good friend that had known me since high school, that we reconnected after a couple years of not being in touch, and she was like, well, are you a musician yet? And I was like, no. And she's like, but you live in Austin, like that was what your dream was. And I was like, I know, but I'm doing this other stuff. And she's like, well, that seems like a cop out. And she kind of called me on it and said, well, why aren't you doing it now? And it's like, well, because I just haven't. And she's like, well, don't be 90 and in your rocking chair complaining to me about how you didn't get a chance to do this, because your chance is when you take it. And after that conversation, I had a real moment of kind of coming to terms with that like there wasn't going to be an invitation to start. I had to make my own invitation and do it. And I, you know, played guitar on and off in college, not well. So I really had to start from the beginning and sit down and relearn how to play guitar, learn how to like finish a song, learned a couple covers, started going to an open mic. And it was true. Like when you start doing it, it becomes much clearer what the next step is.
Was college before Austin and was it at Arizona State University?
Yes.
Why did you go to Austin? Was it for music or something else?
It was for music, in the sense that I wanted to be around a scene I had fallen in love with the songwriters and kind of all of the shows that were coming through Austin while I was in college. I started a music blog, and it seemed more and more that people that I was talking to were Austin based. And eventually that turned into a couple people offering me, just come down and check it out and like, sleep on my couch or in my guest room for a couple days.
Slacker style.
And yeah, very kind of like, just come check it out. Don't worry about it. And then one time it snowed like 4.5 feet in April in Colorado, and the house I was living in had a really steep driveway, and I was stuck, like just stuck. I couldn't get out. It was terrible. And I was over it at that point. I was like, there's nothing in Denver that I need to stay for. As soon as I could get my car out, I was like, I'm gonna go to Austin and just check it out and see what happens. And then that trip turned into oh, well, you need a house sitter and someone to like watch your house while you're on tour. I could stay for like a week or two more. Yeah, no problem. And then suddenly I had put off my jury duty in Colorado so many times that they wouldn't let me put it off anymore. And I had the choice at that moment to get my Texas driver's license and fax it to the judge and say, I'm so sorry, I cannot come to jury duty because I'm a Texas resident and therefore can't serve jury duty in Colorado. Or go back to Colorado and serve jury duty, which would have meant that I had to miss Old Settlers Music Festival. And Sam Bush and Patty Griffin and Sonny Landreth were playing that year, so that was not an option. So I became a Texan and then moved officially to Texas.
That's a good story. Tell me about Patty Griffin. Is that her name, Patty Griffin?
Yeah.
I believe you did something. I hope I'm not
Sort
confusing with someone else. You did
yes, you
something
are.
about for
It's
her
okay.
for her
Very
music.
similar. So Patty Griffin is a current songwriter that's based out of Austin.
Okay.
She's fantastic. But there's another former songwriter who's passed away now named Nancy Griffith.
A Griffith versus
And
Griffin, or the same
yes,
list. Okay, okay.
TH. So Nancy is another absolute favorite of mine. I got to see her perform just twice before she stopped performing, and then she passed away a couple years ago. And so now I host an annual tribute to her songs. So many people that I run into maybe know one or two of her songs or have heard of her, but don't really know her music. When she stopped performing, it seemed like that was an opportunity to just keep her songs alive and make sure that they kept getting heard in whatever small way I could. She stopped performing a number of years before she passed. So it started out as a one-off of just, let's do this and learn some new songs, meet some people, kind of build community around that event. And it went so well the first year that it seemed like a thing to keep doing, especially once she did, once we lost her, to really commit to making sure that these songs that I absolutely love, and I know a lot of people do, and I think are just important to keep as part of the vernacular of Austin music. We have Towns, we have Blaze, we have all these, Lucinda in some ways from being at Wilson Street. They've got all these kind of iconic musicians that have a lot of champions behind them. And in Austin, it felt like there wasn't anybody really talking about Nancy regularly, and I wanted to change that.
Well, how lovely that it evolved into something that you're doing annually. It's a nice,
Yeah,
really
it's a
nice,
lot of fun.
nice tribute. And then Griffin, I'm sorry, I forgot the first name.
Patty.
Patty. I feel like I should know these people, and she's a local artist that you're fond of?
Yeah, I think she's definitely graduated outside of the category of local. I believe she's won a couple Grammys already. But she's locally based and just
Cool.
incredible.
She's big time. I'll have to check them both out.
Yeah.
I may. No, I did not. I must have been thinking of Nancy Griffith, and I haven't yet had made an opportunity to listen to her music, but I will. the Spin Magazine college correspondent thing, did that happen at Arizona State University?
It did, yeah.
Was that in any way like a gateway for you to, well, actually, I think you said it was, but I suppose, or you wrote as much. I suppose it'd be
Yeah,
fun to hear how so.
sure. It was, I guess, maybe my second year of college. I went to school as a journalism major. So it was posted on like the journalism school message board that Spin Magazine was looking for some college correspondents to go cover the Vegas Music Festival in Las Vegas. And I saw that and had been taking photographs for a long time at that point and doing a lot of like film photography and developing it in my little dark room. I was obsessed as a kid with the Beatles, which then turned into an obsession with Linda McCartney. And kind of following that path is what got me into journalism school, going like, well, I'm probably not going to be able to figure out how to be like a Beatle, but this thing where you just take pictures of people, I can figure that out. That's more reasonable. And I'd taken my camera to a lot of shows already at that point. So I had enough of a portfolio of live music photography to send in and get selected. But then I had to like call my dad and be like, oh my gosh, can I please, can you lend me the money to buy a digital camera? Because I I got this great opportunity, but they need me to have a digital camera. And luckily my parents are very supportive and they helped me out with that. And I got to go to Vegas and take these pictures. I got to see Tom Petty and just a ton of people. That was my first experience being able to professionally take pictures at a show and be in the pit and kind of deal with the first three songs sort of rule and all of those restrictions. And that really opened the gate in terms of understanding that I wanted to start my own publication.
What a cool opportunity that must have been. So I was also, well, at one time an amateur at shows, and I used to sneak a Pentax K1000. I don't know if you know what that is, and an
Mm-hmm.
80. I think it's an 8200 millimeter zoom lens, usually with someone with me, a date or something, so we could
Mm-hmm.
take the two
Spread it out.
pieces. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And if I didn't have, rows 1 through 3, I would pay tip those security guys to just let me go up there, and then
Mm-hmm.
tip someone who was sitting there to let me just come in. But a lot of times when they saw me with a camera, they'd be like, oh yeah, come on in. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's amazing how far just kind of acting like you're supposed to be there will get you.
I definitely looked like I wasn't supposed to be there. Uh,
Eh,
but yeah, I can't imagine doing it, with actual media folk. That must have been kind of fun. What a nice experience.
it was pretty amazing that it worked out as as well as it did, honestly. It was one of those things that was just another like, well, you just start doing it and eventually, you're on the phone with Guy Clark and that's fine. It's one of those kind of you just follow the thread and see where it goes.
Maybe perhaps a little surreal at moments, eh?
Very much.
Do you still practice photography?
I do in a lot of different ways, not as much live concerts. I don't have a publication anymore that I would work for, and I don't really it would take too much of my energy and focus to start doing that at a large scale. But I definitely have helped out friends with like their promo shots or artwork for their album and that type of thing.
Oh my God, you would be like the best friend in the world.
Shh, don't let that get out too far.
It's just us, don't worry. And so I read that you have, trolling your Instagram, I read that you have a collection, an archive of spin magazines, and that you're doing some stuff in conjunction with your Patreon. And I did want to ask you about your Patreon, how long it's been going, how it works for you, what you've learned, anything you can share. I think people like myself are always curious to know what's worked, what's
Yeah.
not.
Um, so the archives that I'm putting on my Patreon are actually from the kind of continuation of that situation when I started my own music blog. So they're all from Uncommon Music, which was something I started after the spin correspondent position ended. The spin correspondent was just that one weekend.
You should have just let me believe it was like a short career.
I know, but I can't do that because it's not true.
It's still cool.
So yeah, I'm publishing interviews specifically that I did with various songwriters. One, to revisit them, two, because they don't actually exist on the internet anywhere. They got deleted in a website move I had done years ago, and I had like the backup SQL file and had to pull them out of that. And also as a way to kind of look back and see what I would have done differently now that I've been on the other end for a couple years, because I think there's a constant fascination with how songs are written, how things exist, how things come into being. And so to just look at that more, it's one of the kind of many things that I put on my Patreon. When I started my Patreon, I think in like 2016 or 17, it was very narrowly scoped to new songs. And that was great for like a couple months, but it turns out that I'm not a very fast writer. Then I was going through kind of a dry spell, and it felt very disingenuous to even keep a Patreon open when I was only posting on it once every couple months at most. So I disabled it and kind of went on about just not having one. And then during the pandemic, when everything was shut down, I decided it was a good opportunity to revamp and revisit. It had been a number of years that it had been shut down. Initially, again, started out with it just being new songs, and that worked again for a while. I was relatively prolific during that first year. And then it started feeling a bit disingenuous again. And I never wanted to get into a situation where I was making up a song purely for my Patreon. You know, I didn't want to grab a prompt and be like, I'm going to write about, you know, this cactus and just write a silly song. I wanted it to be, you know, more real to how I am as a writer. And that's not my style at all. So I opened it up to a lot of different things, whether it be photos, kind of behind the scenes looks at recording, or other musical things. I've got a series that I call Musing from the Lap Lanes. I became a lap swimmer during the pandemic as well, and that's a lot of time to kind of think about topics and mull stuff over. So there's some essays from that. There's some drive-by poetry. I have an old typewriter that I try to keep open all the time, and just whenever I walk by it, just rattle out a couple lines. There's other songwriting exercises that I do, kind of the before pieces that eventually make themselves into songs that I write about sometimes. And then this series of interviews from Uncommon Music, because that was sort of the genesis of my music career in a lot of ways.
That is really cool. And I love the drive-by poetry concept. That's really beautiful. I was looking at your Patreon today, and it looks like you have a lot of, I'm just looking at previews, looks like you have a lot of nice stuff there, and certainly some nice things coming. So good for you.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've learned is just not to limit it so heavily and not to overcomplicate it. I only have one level, because previously I had a bunch of like made up levels, and it just seemed, again, very not in line with how it makes sense for me to run it. And it's just a space for people who want to see some behind the scenes and support the music I'm making in a more direct way. And then I try not to worry about it in terms of I don't have X number of patrons, or I'm letting it sort of grow organically.
I think probably, I'm guessing that in the beginning, like when you shut it down, there was this sense of pressure and not wanting to disappoint people. But have you encountered any self-imposed pressure since you relaunched it, and the self-imposed pressure being for, putting new things out there, or how's that working for you?
Yeah, I think that's what made me open it to more types of content that were, in my mind, okay to post. If it was just new songs, I would have probably shut it down again because I don't, that's just not the way that I approach songwriting. I know for a lot of people, songwriting prompts and writing every day and all of that works really well for them. And that's fantastic. And I'm absolutely not discounting that for anybody it works for. But I'm not somebody that it has worked for, and I don't have that sort of disciplined approach to it. And I've tried enough times and disappointed myself enough times that I've just had to learn to accept that the way I write is the way I write. And that's just as valid as any other way somebody writes. I'm still writing songs.
Why do you hang on to a typewriter and use it for drive-by poetry among whatever other things you use it for?
The novelty.
I get that.
I'm very unlikely to just walk by a piece of paper and jot down a random poem. But with a typewriter, it's just interesting. It's more fun. And it's the only thing really that typewriter gets used for. So it's kind of always at the ready.
Is it kind of an old-timey model, if I can use those words, or something somewhat modern?
I believe it's a 1964 Smith Corona.
That sounds like an amazing model.
And it's turquoise. It might be a 65 actually, but it's a little suitcase model.
Nice. You have that. You
And it makes
probably
a
have.
very
Go ahead. Sorry.
satisfying clicky clack noise.
Yeah. Tactile reward gratification.
Exactly.
Do you have pictures of it on your Instagram by chance?
I think there might be one from a long time ago, but I should probably do that.
Yeah. Say that Rabanzo at Unstarving Musician requested it. Yeah, I'd love to see it. And you don't have to put it there for me. So, what inspires you these days?
Oh, this is going to be kind of I don't know, it's not a cop out, but kind of everything in different ways. I was just on a road trip with my sweetie, and on the way back, he's also a songwriter. On the way back, we were thinking about lines and just laughing at how poetic something can sound, even when it's just exactly what's in front of you. If you frame it that way, and a lot of my songs, I think, are written that way, where it's very matter of fact. This is what's happening, and it sounds poetic when you break it down, but it was also, I've got a line in a song called Monsters that says, I didn't know what to say to you the night your mother died. The taste of copper in my mouth from biting on my pride. And it sounds like super or somewhat poetic. I guess I don't want to say super, but it sounds, much more imagined, but it's just real also. I had a friend whose mother died, and it took me probably 8 or 9 months to reach out to him. I didn't have the right words, and I didn't know how to open up that communication. But the longer I sat with it, the worse it felt. So that song is very like exactly what happened, but not at all exactly what happened. And the rest of the song isn't about that at all. So kind of combining multiple events and feelings into one song keeps it from becoming just like, oh, the sky is blue and the trees are green and here I am. It allows you to find inspiration in the most day-to-day obvious things.
Isn't it funny and odd how death can do that to some of us, where we struggle to find the moment, the words,
Yeah.
and can let time pass by. I've always, as I've gotten older, I've sort of resolved that people just want to hear from you and know that you're thinking about them, and that's pretty much it. There's nothing terribly special that needs to be said, but I also understand that for many people who want to be there for someone, that there's a great sense of loss within themselves. So it's a whole struggle, not just knowing what to say. Sometimes it's just real pain.
Yeah.
When was the last time, I think this is a good question for you, and one I had written down. I didn't know if I'd ask, but when was the last time you did something you've never done before?
Ooh. a good question. In a like anything I've never done before, or in a like kind of geared myself up for doing something new sort of way?
Yes.
Which one?
Either. It's your choice. I'm just messing with you.
Okay, let's see. Uh, I recently on that road trip we stopped in Taos, and I don't know. I'm sure I probably had been to Taos as like a kid, but I had never been to Taos as an adult, and so that was a new experience, and that was a lot of fun to explore a new town. I'm looking forward to going to Germany later this year. It's been a long time since I've had the opportunity to travel internationally, so going completely alone will be a new experience.
That sounds like it'll be fun. I love that you
Yeah.
chose places and travel. And I've never been to Taos or Germany, actually. I've traveled abroad a fair amount, but um, yeah, I'd like to see both places. I think I actually heard someone mention Taos just today listening to a great podcast. I don't listen to all the episodes, but the ones I've chosen have been just wonderful. And the one today was actually an interview with, I guess, a very noteworthy advertising executive from the UK. I think he's Welsh. And
Huh.
the podcast, the interviewer was Rick Rubin, but I'm feeling like a lot of people don't know about this one because Rick Rubin is kind of known for doing interviews on Broken Record, but he has his own called Tetragrammaton, and yeah, he has some really fascinating people, and of course, when he needs to, sometimes, like when I was listening to this interview with the advertising exec, which is beautiful because he talks so much about creativity. I don't know
Mm.
how normally musicians react to something like I was listening to an advertising executive, uh, but
I mean,
uh,
advertising is all creativity.
yeah, yeah, for sure. But just the ways that he broke it down was super fascinating. But I was going to say in this particular interview, the guy had so much to say. I felt like in an almost 2 hour interview or maybe more, Rick Rubin asked maybe 4 questions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty good though. I really enjoyed it. I was thinking today that I need to put that in my liner notes newsletter that because I really would love for people to listen to it. I don't think he does transcripts, but now I think it's fairly easy to scrape a transcript if somebody's nerdy enough to
Yeah,
to make your own transcript and try and figure out what they're saying where the errors occur. But
for sure. There's NLP models all over the place that are open source.
I read maybe perhaps in your bio that it seems like it comes up. It's a theme that came up a couple times that you didn't play an instrument for a long time. You didn't call yourself a poet, but you were kind of a poet. You were a songwriter, and you didn't play an instrument. And somehow this was like making you feel, or I read it as like it was a perceived obstacle. And I was curious to know what stopped you from learning an instrument in the beginning. And I know I gather well, actually, I've seen you play guitar now, not in person, unfortunately, but you have a great. Is that as I didn't stop to look and see what the model was. It sort of reminds me of a Telecaster now that I'm like trying to remember it. Beautiful bluish color. But what stopped you from learning in the beginning?
A lot of things, primarily just lack of access. Louviers was pretty remote, and so to like go to a music lesson would have required like a pretty decent drive. And I took a few music lessons here and there as a kid, but it was just not something that was very easy to maintain. And at that point as well, like not having any knowledge of like how you kind of then went on to be a musician, I wasn't particularly interested in like playing with a church, which is the only kind of musicians that I knew at the time. So there was a lot of just lack of access and lack of end game desire effectively. You know, as I was in college, I got myself a guitar graduating high school and learned a little bit, enough to kind of have fun in my dorm room. And then didn't really, again, there wasn't like an end game, and I was so busy with photography at the time that there wasn't the focus there. So then when I decided that, oh, to do music, you just start doing music, that seemed like the first step that needed to happen, because everything that I had at that point to base on kind of a model or a path, so to speak, was very much solo singer songwriters. So that seemed like the next, all right, if you want to do this, learn to play guitar, learn to play some songs, and then take some of the words you've written and put them to music.
Is there anything you would tell your younger self, pre guitarist self, today about that whole journey?
I'm tempted to say, I'd tell my younger self, like, stick with it, like, pick up a guitar and, like, actually learn it when you're a kid. But I also think that there's something that's important about the journeys we take. And that had I started learning as a kid and stuck with it and become, much more well versed than I am today in playing, I don't know that that would have taken me on the same path. And I don't know that it would be as special as it is to me now.
I can completely understand that. You look very cool playing the guitar, by the way, and I listened to your music on two occasions, one of them being today, and I'm actually, after listening today, I'm looking forward to putting it in the rotation, so to speak. But I find it exquisite. I was thinking about the word. I find it exquisite, actually, your voice. And I'm the type of person that listens for a long time to melodies and instrumentation before I ever notice the words. And I know you have a big focus as a songwriter, obviously, on lyrics. So I should say I look forward to actually paying attention to the lyrics as well. But I mean, just melodically and sonically, and the sound of your voice is wonderful. And actually, I think watching you or seeing pictures of you play guitar for some reason made me smile. Oh, I'm like, she looks pretty
Well,
cool.
thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap up here. I want to be sensitive of our time. So last few questions, but I noticed maybe I should know more of the names, but I was looking at contributing songwriters for your Dance Songs for the Apocalypse EP. Great title, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Thank
And
you.
I saw the name Sia.
Mm-hmm.
Is was that did she contributed to a song on the record? As far as writing?
Yes, but not in the way that, not in like a cool way. So that record is just, it's a covers record. And in songwriting, once you have released a song, there's something called a compulsory license that you have to grant for anybody else that wants to record your song. For myself, I just went to an agency called the Harry Fox Agency and typed in the name of the song that she had written and paid the compulsory licensing fee, which is just a mechanical royalty. It's like 9.1 cents per copy for physical copies. Once you pay that fee, you're legally allowed to record a song that's already been released. So she did write the song, and there's, all the songs on that record were written by other people, but there was no direct involvement with her or anybody else that wrote songs on that record. Unfortunately, that would have been really cool.
Yeah, so I think I noticed, I believe it was the first song was a cover, and it did dawn on me that perhaps that it was I didn't listen to the rest of them on this particular one, but it dawned on me maybe it's a cover thing, but I just had to ask, and that's still very cool. And
Yeah.
I love your knowledge of the mechanics of doing all that you've learned. That's really nice and informative too.
I'm a bit of a process nerd.
Ah, it sounded like it. I love the house concerts page on your website, by the way. Are you doing many these days?
I do them when they come up. I love doing them. I think that's a lot of fun and a great way to experience music. I love going to house concerts. I haven't done as many this year just because the focus has been much more on kind of other things and getting this record finished before really trying to tour heavily again. But I love house concerts, kind of keep that as a way to hope to get more of them.
Well, I like the page. and I was kind of imagining the funnel workflow of someone expressing interest, because you did it in a pretty simple and kind of elegant way, in my opinion. And yeah, well, I hope you get a lot more of them. I know they're a lot of fun. I'm actually going to do some in November here where I live in Querétaro, Mexico, with a blues artist that's coming from Chicago. But I really love them conceptually. I had such a good time doing the one that I've done. I'm contemplating doing, the private hosting thing
Mm.
myself, and starting that with my friend's visit. And we have one other one planned that's going to be a little unusual in that the venue, the gentleman whose home we're playing at, he's actually built a small amphitheater in his backyard,
Oh,
and
wow.
it's completely set up for live music, lighting, PA, like everything. And
That's incredible.
it's really beautiful. It's in a beautiful town, a well-known town here, and yeah, I had an opportunity to play there with a blues covers ensemble that I'm playing drums with, and it was a lot of fun. So anyway, I look super forward to going back. Will be like a three-piece and featuring this friend of mine who is an amazing blues singer and guitarist. So anyway,
Fun.
yes, I hope that you get to do a lot more. And I know how much fun they are. And you made me realize how much I'd really like to just attend one. I don't think they're a big thing where I am, but hopefully I'll be
Mm.
instrumental in making them popular.
Yeah, they tend to kind of, once one starts going, other people see that it's possible,
Hmm.
and there tend to be more that pop up around those.
Yeah, and it's quite possibly a very unusual concept here
Mm.
for the literal local culture, the people that expressed interest, and even the gentleman that is hosting one. They were all expats.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it's just like a cultural barrier to surpass. But
Sure.
okay, so also on your Instagram, I believe it was, I saw you had, or Facebook, a big birthday show in July,
Yes.
and that apparently you're acquainted with. I hope I'm saying her name right, Jana Pochop.
Yes.
She's been on the podcast. It's been a while, but she's a lovely lady.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I love Jana.
yeah, she's really cool. Um, so the post amused me, so I wanted to ask about the show and the magnitude of the show and the logistics of the show and the many cliffs that you had to be talked down from.
For the birthday show?
Yes.
Mm, boy. It's always an honor to get to play Cactus Cafe, kind of coming up through the Austin music scene. That's one of the places that even growing up in Colorado, I knew about and knew that was special. It's not a very big venue. I think it seats about 150 people, but it's always just an absolute honor to play there. It's always way more fun to play with a band. And that does mean there's more logistics in terms of just coordinating everybody and rehearsing and doing all those things. And then you just hope that people show up. I think there was definitely a moment when I was trying to decide what to wear, and I was upstairs in the green room and like had peeked down to see if people were like arriving and lined up or anything yet. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is not going to be, nobody's going to come. It's going to be terrible. Like, what are we even doing here? And it was Jana actually that was like, no, 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 people will show up. Just take your outfit and like go sound check. It's going to be fine. And she was right. People showed up. I didn't have to take very many cupcakes home at the end of the night, and that's really all I can hope for at a show.
I bet it was wonderful.
It was a lot of fun.
And let's close with your love of stationery, just because I'm fascinated, and I think you had a reel going, or of some project you were doing with stationery.
Yeah, I was writing thank you notes to the people who backed my Kickstarter and got CDs. I'm trying to get those rewards out at a timely fashion, and I have the CDs now. I'm waiting for the vinyl still. So I was just addressing and writing thank you notes to all of those Kickstarters, and I do love stationery and collections, and fancy pens. I wrote with a fountain pen exclusively during high school.
Oh,
I
wow.
was that obnoxious, nerdy child. Um, for a while, I was actually using like bottled ink, which is messy and sort of annoying, but
I can imagine. Yeah.
whatever. So I always love an excuse to break out, postcards or stationery or anything that I can get through. And I've limited myself to a single drawer, so now I have to use it in order to get new stationery so that I don't have a giant stockpile going.
I love it. Okay. Let me see if I have one thing I want to say before I let you go. I don't. I know I was looking at a great website today, and it's so funny I can't find it right now. I normally have this in my notes, but can you please say your website? It looked like a wonderful hub for all things Nichole Wagner.
Yeah, it's NicholeWagnerMusic.com.
I thought so. I should have just typed that in.
And you can type pretty much any way of spelling Nichole Wagner that you can come up with, and it should get you there.
I got some other Nichole Wagner just now. I think she's a makeup artist or something, and I'm like, that's not the one.
Huh.
But I did see it. It's a great site. I think I found it through your Facebook page, and Facebook was how I found you because I love trying to visit Brian Wolf's page on Friday mornings because he's always like, does anybody have any good news?
Yeah.
And yes, so I saw you there, and I'm so glad that I did. Nichole, thank you for making
Yeah,
time to
thank
speak with
you.
me. I'm looking so forward to listening to your music. And I should have asked, is there anything that you like wanted to mention that you're doing or any asks or complaints?
How much time you got? I think the biggest thing is just that we're really focused on getting this new record, Plastic Flowers, out. There's 2 tracks that are currently available on Spotify already, Monsters and Raised by Wolves, and we're looking at releasing another single at the end of October, and then one in January before the record comes out, likely in March.
Awesome album artwork, by the way.
Thank you.
It's very cool. Well, thanks again. Great talking with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
This episode was powered by Podcast Startup. If you feel you need a little help with that podcast you're contemplating, Podcast Startup may be just the thing for you. Podcast Startup is a program designed for new podcasters. Did you know that most podcasts don't make it past their first few episodes? That's right. They start, they stall, and then they die. Sustaining a podcast ain't easy. It's commitment. A lack of planning and misaligned expectations are a recipe for fast burnout and fade out for podcasters. This is exactly the kind of thing that Podcast Startup was designed to help you with. If you're intrigued, if you want to start a podcast the right way, go to unstarvingmusician.com/podcast startup to learn more and to receive free podcast startup tips from yours truly. Thank you for listening. You can leave us feedback, questions, comments, complaints at unstarvingmusician.com/feedback. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you love this podcast, please visit unstarvingmusician.com/crowd sponsor to learn about the many ways of showing your love and support. Your support does indeed equal love. The series music you heard in this episode is New Gods Part 2 by yours truly. Find links for all the places to hear the full version with vocals by yours truly at rabonzo.com. If you do not yet have a website for your music, check out Bandzoogle. It was created to help musicians and bands build their website and manage direct-to-fan marketing and sales. Bandzoogle has amazing design options, a commission-free store to sell music, merch, tickets, and more, plus tools that can capture detailed fan data for you. Try it at bandzoogle.com. Use the promo code ROBONZO, that's ROBONZO, to get 15% off your first year. Find links for all the people and things talked about in this episode at unstarvingmusician.com. Peace, love, and a whole lot of gratitude.